We're going to talk again about the midterm election happening on November 6th. We're in Ohio, I am at least. And the real problem I see here is that we're talking about an electorate that's really apathetic in Ohio. And that's bad news if you're on either side of the political aisle. Uh, but it depends on what race we're talking about. So a couple of other times I addressed the gubernatorial race, and I would say that in a race between Mike DeWine, who's the Attorney General of Ohio and he's the Republican, versus Richard Cadre, who's the Democratic candidate for governor, an apathetic public would probably help DeWine. I can tell you that I drive through this county, I drive all around, and I don't see very many signs for Richard Cadre, even though this is the most solidly Democratic county in the state. Uh, if you go to other counties, though, I drive 3 counties over for work every day. There's almost no election signs that have to do with statewide races. So I think that might be a bad sign for Mike DeWine. And in fact, anywhere you go here, many of the signs just have to do if there are election yard signs, they happen to be for local judges and for school boards and for all that type of crap that honestly I never pay attention to. Which maybe I should, but you're not going to make me. In any case, I would say that Mike DeWine, who is a seasoned politician, has won several races. I think he served 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. He was elected 2 times. He was elected and reelected the Attorney General here in Ohio. Mike DeWine would probably benefit very much from less people showing up on election day, which, to be honest with you, nobody cares about it here in Ohio. People are more apt to be talking about going to the movies and drinking over here, or the baseball playoffs. The Indians are in the playoffs, by the way, this year, and the Browns. They don't really care about what's going on specific to this state. Some people have opinions on politics at the national level, and it doesn't really translate to the local level. Now, the senatorial race here in Ohio is going to be very difficult for the Republicans to win. And it's for a very simple reason that Sherrod Brown, the incumbent who knocked out Mike DeWine when he was senator in 2006, is very popular among the labor movement here in Ohio. And he has good press. I believe his wife used to be a columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and she continues to be active in a couple of shitty national publications that don't really produce any worthwhile news. But this guy has almost never had any controversy on the statewide level. And his opponent is Jim Renacci, who is a mediocre congressman from the Canton area, which is, it's unfortunate because I think the state of Ohio has a lot of very good politicians, or a lot of very good people that could contribute to the debate on either side, on both the left and the right. If you followed me in the spring, you'll notice that I kind of played defense attorney, I guess you would call it, in the smear campaign against Dennis Kucinich, who was called an Assad stooge or whatever. It was claimed that he was basically pro-Syrian, all of that. And I looked into it, and I found that the amount of money that Kucinich had been paid in order to make an appearance back way before the campaign was not significant enough for me to call him a stooge of Bashar Assad. It was in the tens of thousands of dollars, but you have to remember that it's a considerable expense to commute to London and to have I think that it was a low blow. I think Dennis Kucinich would make a very compelling candidate. But of course, he wouldn't run against an incumbent like Sherrod Brown, so he ran for governor and was just destroyed. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, you have Jim Renacci, who I don't think he's a terrible candidate, but he's not much better than terrible. He's just a person who will make an appearance and say a lot of the typical GOP things, about controlled budgets and about the need to pass strong defense spending or something like that. And you hear him, and it's basically as if somebody assigned him a job, and he's just filling out an order. This isn't a very inspirational person. Sherrod Brown himself, I think, one of the reasons he's so strong among the labor movement here is because he's continued to be responsive to their needs. He's always been a pro-labor congressman and then senator during his time in Washington, going and voting for bills that improve, I guess, I guess you'd call it worker representation. He's been a steady, progressive labor Democrat his entire career, and I do oppose him. I think yes, I do. I would say that he's a stooge of the corporate Democrats much of the time, apart from when it comes to organized labor. Now, let's talk about some of their weaknesses. I guess we'll do Jim Renacci first. He was associated with this guy, Ben Suarez, who was this businessman who was convicted of I don't even remember what it was. But this is a fairly biased report from Brent Larkin from Cleveland.com, which is our only major paper here. And it says some skeletons just won't leave a politician's closet at the worst possible time. They rattle around and remind voters of unflattering episodes from an office holder's past. That's what's happening now with Representative Jim Renacci, the Northeast Ohio congressman and Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate seat held by Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown. So this was published in July. Renacci wants voters to forget he was once a marionette for disgraced North Canton businessman and convicted felon Ben Suarez. Well, look. I would say that the relationship they had, it's not. I don't know how they can. Let's see why they call him a marionette. Okay, let's be fair. But now it seems that the Suarez skeleton will be dangling in plain view for the duration of the campaign, a reminder of Renacci's role in the courtroom drama that earned Suarez a 15-month prison sentence, later reduced to about 13 months for good behavior. Suarez is Renacci's worst nightmare. For Brown, he's the gift that keeps on giving. A July 6th story by Dayton Daily News reporter Laura Biscoff revealed telephone logs obtained by federal investigators found Renacci and Suarez exchanged more than 40 calls between late 2012 and May 2012. Late 2010 and May 2012. So 40 calls in a 2-year span. Yes, there is a connection. It's not as if they're calling. It's definitely not even calling every month, I would say. It is about every month. Let's say it's a 3-year period, so 2.5-year period. Evidence in Suarez's 2014 criminal trial showed that in 2011, Renacci wrote a letter to Governor John Kasich complaining about an investigation into the business practices of Suarez's company being conducted by the state of California. Renacci's letter proved profitable. Days later, checks from Suarez employees were headed to the congressman's campaign treasury, eventually totaling a reported $100,000. So what happened, if I remember this, was that Suarez was in some sort of legal trouble because I think he had some sort of telemarketing company or something, and he violated some California law, and then the state of California chased after him, and then he tried to get his hooks in Renacci, and when he did, his employees forwarded money to, his employees basically were compelled to make political donations to Jim Renacci. And I think this is wrong. I think Suarez definitely. I mean, from what I heard, he had a very justifiable conviction. So that's about it for Renacci. Other than being just very uninspiring, this Chris Pontius from Jackass. I was just reading this before. It has nothing to do with the article, but the video. In any case, Sherrod Brown and Jim Renacci, I think, are two bad candidates. Now, why would I say Sherrod Brown is a bad candidate? You have this report from Daily Caller. And it shows that Sherrod Brown was accused of spousal abuse back in the 80s by his first wife. And eventually, she, they're talking about, we have this Me Too Ohio. So this is a campaign ad they made for Betty Sutton, who's the candidate for deputy governor or whatever, vice governor.
Domestic violence and harassment. Courageous women in Ohio are telling their stories. Betty Sutton bravely showed that even when the domestic volcano occurred decades ago, speaking out helps. Now, Senator Sherrod Brown is facing his own Me Too movement from his past. These court records show sworn evidence that Brown's ex-wife accused him of abusing her. She said Brown assaulted her. A judge had to issue a restraining order. Later, she said Brown violated the court order, pushing, shoving, and bullying her. Brown claims it's a family matter, but his ex-wife, like other victims, has a right to be believed. This senator had to resign when evidence emerged he mistreated women. Why is Senator Brown different? Here's a good point.
First of all, every victim deserves to be heard. Anyone who's alleging any sort of assault or abuse needs to be listened to.
Call Congress and demand laws that allow every victim to be heard.
Okay, so I would say here's some of the issues that I have with that. Now, this isn't from Jim Renacci, by the way. So far as I know, it's from Me Too Ohio. But I'll get to the issue I have with this, and then what I think is really the important issue here in total. Yes, he did have some sort of a restraining order against him, and his ex-wife claims that he violated the restraining order and did physically confront her one time. I believe physically confronted her new husband at a certain point. But from what the reports say, they've sort of reconciled, and she's put it behind her. Is that really fair to drag his ex-wife into the campaign if she's not really interested in being a part of this accusation against Sherrod Brown? I don't know. I think it might be a little too it's not exactly taking into consideration the concerns of the victim. Now, let me tell you why this is important. Sherrod Brown and his party and all the people that are affiliated with him are constantly talking about the war on women and on the way men get away with all sorts of crimes. And the fact is that if he does not want people to talk about his own issues, then he should shut up about Me Too and about all of these other things that he's claiming are big topics where there's sexual assault and Kavanaugh and Trump and whatever. He had credible allegations filed against him, including court-ordered restraining or court-mandated restraining orders. That means essentially that the burden of, or I guess the totality of evidence at the moment is a little higher for him than it is for some of these other people. After all, with Brett Kavanaugh, there was never a police report filed for any of these incidents. With Sherrod Brown, his wife did file a restraining order. She did go through a certain part of the legal process in order to try to hold him accountable, at least for a certain time, while they were getting divorced. And for him to parade around and say, "Well, we're gonna stand up for women and whatever. This is all about protecting women's rights." No. If you really wanted to protect women's rights, therefore you probably would drop out of the race, Sherrod Brown. This is kind of an issue of personal integrity. I do think it's a little bit of a problem when the media tries to drag in a former spouse who doesn't really want into it. And I think she said that Brown has changed, but I mean, according to the standards of the liberal and progressive left, somebody who was alleged to have committed a sexual assault uh, back in 1982, as in Brett Kavanaugh, and who is being accused for the first time now, that person cannot change. But somebody who was reported due to a court mandated restraining order to have engaged in physical violence against his wife back in the 80s, okay, when he was already a mature adult, that person has changed. That's their standard, and I think that it does show really the emptiness of Brown's character. And the only reason that he's probably going to win is because of his closeness to the labor voters, the union thugs. And then there's this gem. So this from the Toledo Blade. Toledo is on the northwest coast of Ohio. And as you might know, we have a pretty dirty lake here called Lake Erie. And there was some sort of algae bloom last year. It says the re-election campaign for U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown canceled a news conference meant to highlight his environmental record just hours after a group invited to support the senators said it would picket instead of endorse Mr. Brown. The event was scheduled for Wednesday at Middle Grounds Metro Park with Toledo Mayor Wade Kapchukowicz. I don't know how his name goes. And environmental groups expected to be in attendance, as well as representatives from Mr. Brown's campaign. The senator was in Washington, D.C. Middle Grounds is on the banks of the Maumee River, which last year saw the kind of toxic algal bloom that has plagued Lake Erie. Mr. Kapchukowicz, Northwest Ohio leaders and environmental advocates will make the case for why Sherrod is the only Senate candidate Ohioans can trust to fight for clean water and a safe environment, the Brown campaign said in a news release. Among those invited was advocates for a clean Lake Erie. The group had been expected to support the Democratic senator who was running against Republican U.S. Representative Jim Renacci of Wadsworth. Please feel free to attend, as well as to bring along anyone from your organization who may be supportive of Senator Brown's position, wrote Gretchen DeBacker, Mr. Kapchukowicz's. That's like a really weird Polish name. Legislative director and campaign manager in an email to supporters. Advocates for Clean Lake Erie coordinator Mike Ferner responded on Tuesday with concerns about Mr. Brown's record on the lake. I'm not sure what part of Sherrod Brown's record indicates why he is the only Senate candidate Ohioans can trust to fight for clean water and a safe environment. As best we can tell, he never came out in favor of an impaired status. It's hard to say for sure, since of the hundreds of postcards we sent to him over the last 2 years, I haven't talked to anyone who got a response. So they're trying to get these people to come out and support him at an event. And they've been trying to contact him apparently for 2 years in order to get his help on promoting their issue. So this is a kind of a blunder for the Brown campaign, and I think he can rely on the fact that Ohioans don't really care. Look, the lake has become a cesspool again. It's basically a toilet for algae. That's Lake Erie here, at least in the northwest part. I'm in the northeast, so I guess people here don't care yet. But it's going to happen, and I don't really know that many people from Toledo, but it's not as if that's a very large distance. The next day, Mr. Ferner's group issued its own press release about 9 a.m., saying it would picket before the 2 p.m. news conference. Copied were members of Brown's campaign and his legislative staff and the mayor's office. 2 hours later, the Brown campaign sent an email saying the event was canceled because of a scheduling conflict. The mayor's office said Thursday that while Mr. Kapchukowicz had a busy day, the cancellation came from Mr. Brown's team. The senator's campaign indicated the issue was with Mr. So the mayor and the senator are blaming each other for the schedule mix-up. A review of the mayor's schedule did not show a conflict in the afternoon. The Brown camp responded with statements of support for the senator from the League of Conservation Voters Action Fund, National Resources Defense Council Action Fund, Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund, and Ohio Sierra Club. Okay, so those are very strong advocacy groups in politics for the environment, but really the group that was concerned with the algal bloom has, they're the ones that are directly situated to the issue. So this really does show that Brown may have lost a few votes, at least on the progressive side. Mr. Ferner said his group was never notified the event was off, and members arrived Wednesday afternoon at Mill Grounds with signs, so they protested an event that never happened. We really don't know what happened other than nobody from the mayor's office and the Brown campaign showed up, he said. Mr. Ferner's group has criticized the senator for not supporting an impaired status for Lake Erie or U.S. Environmental Protection Agency cleanup, similar to what is being done for Virginia's Chesapeake Bay. That's interesting. When it comes to Lake Erie, Senator Brown needs to tell voters exactly what his policy is for Lake Erie, because so far we haven't seen much to celebrate, he wrote in a news release, which also lists 5 questions about the lake it plans to send Mr. Brown and other candidates running for office in Northwest Ohio. Senator Brown has supported millions of dollars in funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and for more Department of Agriculture funded buffer strips, but as laudable as those things sound, neither of them will tell us who is responsible for the pollution going into the lake or hold anyone accountable. So I think, by the way, a lot of these environmental groups are kind of run by wackos. This guy seemed to know how to speak very responsibly and to the point. And I did look up the group just for the record. And it says ACLE members showed up to picket at 2 p.m. news conference scheduled for Middle Grounds Metro Park in Toledo, where Senator Sherrod Brown was to be recognized by Toledo's mayor for his environmental record. See our news release below for a response to that idea, but nobody from the mayor's office or Senator Brown's campaign showed up at the park. No details as to why. So, yeah, I say that this senator, Sherrod Brown, he's taking the state for granted. I would say this, okay? I am definitely not going to vote for Sherrod Brown, but I don't know if my vote will really help Jim Renacci do very well, because the guy's kind of a joke. So I'm not optimistic about it, and I don't know about anybody. A lot of these people, they get hyped up. They're like, oh, every vote matters, whatever. You know what also matters? That the candidate isn't a fucking idiot. Okay, it doesn't matter if you have a candidate that's slightly closer to your side than the other side. If the guy just is not really worth much, and nothing personal against Jim Renacci, but I haven't seen much to impress me about him. So that's about it. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you guys later.